The global geopolitical landscape is undergoing significant transformation, with new players emerging and alliances being reconfigured. One of the most notable developments is the expansion of the BRICS, led by China and Russia. This bloc, initially focused on economic issues, is evolving into a geopolitical force aiming to counterbalance the influence of the G7. China and Russia are at the forefront of what they call the democratization of international geopolitics. While these countries are not recognized as democracies in the traditional Western sense, they argue that this shift will bring more balanced representation of the global South in world decision-making. This initiative reflects growing dissatisfaction with the Western-dominated world order and a desire to create a multipolar system. In this changing context, Brazil and China have announced a joint initiative to mediate global conflicts, including the war between Russia and Ukraine. This proposal will be presented on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, with the participation of 19 countries, focusing particularly on nations from the global South. This approach represents an attempt to bring new perspectives and solutions to international conflicts, challenging the traditional Western-led mediation methods. The joint peace proposal between Brazil and China is seen by some as controversial, as it does not fully address Ukraine's demands. However, it is important to note that Ukraine's peace plan also does not fully consider the interests of China, Brazil, and, for obvious reasons, Russia. This situation illustrates the complexity of international negotiations and the difficulty in finding solutions that satisfy all parties involved. Each country is trying to gather as many supporters as possible for its vision of resolving the conflict. This creates a complex diplomatic scenario where alliances are tested and new partnerships are formed. The effectiveness of these initiatives will depend on the ability to build consensus and overcome historical and ideological differences between the nations involved. The situation at the Israel-Lebanon border remains extremely tense, with the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah intensifying in a worrying manner. Since the start of the heavier clashes, it is estimated that between 60,000 to 80,000 people have been displaced, creating a significant humanitarian crisis in the region. Israel insists on the return of these displaced people to the north of the country as a basic premise for any negotiation, a condition that further complicates the prospects for a peaceful resolution. A crucial point in this conflict is the enforcement of UN Resolution 1701, which prohibits the presence of armed militias in southern Lebanon, except for the official Lebanese army. This resolution, adopted in 2006, has never been fully implemented by any of the involved parties, contributing to ongoing instability in the region. The failure to implement this resolution highlights the challenges faced by the international community in enforcing agreements in complex conflict zones. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, made strong statements, claiming that the goal is the complete elimination of Hezbollah. He suggested that the offensives will not cease until the group is annihilated, a stance that indicates a potential escalation of the conflict and raises concerns about a wider war in the region. This aggressive rhetoric complicates diplomatic efforts and increases the risk of a prolonged and destructive conflict. Meanwhile, Iran, leader of the so-called Axis of Resistance, positions itself as an opponent of U.S. and Israeli influence in the Middle East. Iran's support for Hezbollah and other groups in the region adds an additional layer of complexity to the conflict, turning it into a proxy for broader regional rivalries. Israeli media has reported mobilizations of various groups, including Iran, Hezbollah, and the Houthis from Yemen. There are rumors that members of these groups are moving to Syria, training to operate tanks, artillery, and drones on the border between Syria and Israel in the disputed Golan Heights. If confirmed, this would represent a significant escalation in regional tensions and could lead to a broader conflict. Israel claims that recent attacks were a response to these movements. However, it is important to note that this information may be used as justification for preemptive actions by Israel. The situation remains volatile, with the risk of a rapid escalation that could involve multiple regional actors. In the Russia-Ukraine war, new and significant developments have emerged, altering the dynamics of the conflict. The European Union announced a substantial aid package of €35 billion to Ukraine, using frozen Russian assets. This package is structured as a loan, not a direct fund transfer, which has important implications for Ukraine's long-term economy. This EU decision demonstrates a continued commitment to supporting Ukraine, but also raises questions about the country's post-war financial sustainability. In a significant strategic move, Putin announced a dramatic increase in drone production, expanding the number of these devices tenfold. This announcement signals a shift in Russian military strategy, with a growing focus on technological warfare and unmanned operations. In response to this emerging threat, NATO and Ukraine conducted joint training in the Netherlands, specifically focused on combating drones. The training, which lasted 11 days and involved 50 companies and 20 countries, demonstrates the adaptability of Western and Ukrainian forces to the new realities of the battlefield. In recent days, Ukraine appears to have shifted its strategic posture, successfully attacking Russian ammunition and equipment depots. A particularly notable attack occurred in the Krasnodar region, hitting a depot of North Korean missiles seated in the agreement between Putin and Kim Jong-un. These successful attacks suggest an improvement in Ukrainian intelligence and operational capabilities, possibly with Western support. Russia has faced increasing difficulties in defending against these Ukrainian airstrikes, which could indicate a significant shift in the conflict's dynamics. This Russian vulnerability to Ukrainian precision strikes may force a re-evaluation of Russia's defensive strategies and potentially alter the balance of power on the battlefield. At the same time, Putin announced the recruitment of approximately 180,000 new volunteer soldiers, offering attractive pay and compensation. This mass recruitment could represent a significant reinforcement for Russian forces, potentially offsetting losses and preparing for a new phase of the conflict. However, the effectiveness of these new recruits compared to more experienced soldiers remains to be seen. The situation at the Israel-Lebanon border continues to deteriorate alarmingly. Recent Israeli attacks on Lebanon have resulted in over 30 deaths and hundreds of injuries, marking a significant escalation in the conflict. In response to these attacks, Lebanon accuses Israel of terrorism, escalating rhetoric and increasing diplomatic tensions. On the other hand, Israel claims to be merely fulfilling its strategic objectives, insisting that it does not seek a widespread war, but rather aims to protect its national security interests. Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed Lebanese group, has been demonstrating its strength impressively. Released images show gigantic underground launchers and anti-aircraft missiles capable of downing Israeli drones. These capabilities have seemingly surprised Israeli intelligence, suggesting that Hezbollah may be a more formidable adversary than previously thought. The revelation of these advanced military capabilities adds a new dimension to the conflict, potentially altering Israel's strategic calculations. Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, made strong statements asserting that the goal is the complete elimination of Hezbollah. He suggested that military operations will continue until the group is annihilated, a stance indicating a possible significant escalation of the conflict. This aggressive rhetoric raises concerns about the potential for a large-scale war in the region, with devastating consequences for civilians on both sides of the border. Meanwhile, Iran, the leader of the so-called Axis of Resistance, continues to position itself as an opponent to U.S. and Israeli influence in the Middle East. Iran's support for Hezbollah and other groups in the region adds an additional layer of complexity to the conflict, transforming it into a proxy for broader regional rivalries. There are reports of mobilizations among various groups, including Iran, Hezbollah, and the Houthis from Yemen, with rumors of movements to Syria and training in the disputed Golan Heights. If confirmed, these movements could represent a significant escalation in regional tensions and potentially lead to a broader conflict involving multiple actors. In the war between Russia and Ukraine, new and significant developments have emerged, altering the dynamics of the conflict. The European Union announced a substantial aid package of €35 billion for Ukraine, structured as a loan and utilizing frozen Russian assets. This EU decision demonstrates ongoing commitment to supporting Ukraine, but also raises questions about the country's financial sustainability post-war and the legal and political implications of using one country's frozen assets to finance another. Putin announced a dramatic increase in drone production, expanding the number of these devices tenfold. This announcement signals a shift in Russian military strategy, with a growing focus on technological warfare and unmanned operations. The expansion of Russia's drone capabilities poses a significant challenge to Ukrainian defenses and potentially alters the balance of power on the battlefield. In response to this emerging threat, NATO and Ukraine conducted joint training in the Netherlands, specifically focused on drone combat. The training lasted 11 days and involved participation from 50 companies and 20 countries, demonstrating the adaptability of Western and Ukrainian forces to the new realities of the battlefield. This type of military and technological cooperation between NATO and Ukraine could have significant implications for the future of the conflict. In recent days, Ukraine appears to have changed its strategic posture, conducting successful attacks on Russian ammunition depots and equipment. One particularly notable attack occurred in the Krasnodar region, targeting a depot of North Korean missiles provided under the agreement between Putin and Kim Jong-un. These successful attacks suggest an improvement in Ukrainian intelligence and operational capabilities, possibly with Western support, and may indicate a shift in the dynamics of the conflict. Russia has been facing increasing difficulties in defending against these Ukrainian airstrikes, which may indicate a significant shift in the dynamics of the conflict. This Russian vulnerability to precise Ukrainian attacks could necessitate a reassessment of Russia's defensive strategies and potentially alter the balance of power on the battlefield. At the same time, Putin announced the recruitment of around 180,000 new volunteer soldiers, who will receive pay and benefits, potentially providing a significant boost to Russian forces. This mass recruitment may be an attempt to compensate for losses suffered and prepare for a new phase of the conflict. However, the effectiveness of these new recruits compared to more experienced soldiers remains to be seen and could have a significant impact on the future course of the war. In the global geopolitical landscape, China and Russia are leading a significant expansion of BRICS, transforming the bloc from an entity primarily focused on economic issues into a geopolitical force that actively seeks to counterbalance the G7. This shift represents a fundamental change in the global balance of power, with potentially far-reaching implications for the world order. China and Russia are promoting what they call the democratization of international geopolitics. Although these countries are not recognized as democracies in the traditional Western sense, they argue that this change will bring a more balanced representation of global South nations in global decision-making. This initiative reflects a growing dissatisfaction with the Western-dominated world order and a desire to create a truly multipolar system. In this changing context, Brazil and China have announced a joint initiative to mediate global conflicts, including the war between Russia and Ukraine. This proposal will be presented on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, involving 19 countries and focusing particularly on nations from the global South. This approach represents an attempt to bring new perspectives and solutions to international conflicts, challenging the traditional mediation methods led by Western powers. The upcoming week promises to be extremely eventful with the UN General Assembly. Important statements are expected from world leaders, including Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and Mahmoud Abbas of Palestine, with Brazil having the honor of opening the assembly. In addition to the main sessions, the meetings on the sidelines of the assembly are crucial for international diplomacy. For example, Ukrainian President Zelensky plans to present his victory plan to both President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, although it is highly unlikely that Russia will accept such a plan under the current circumstances. These meetings and negotiations on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly offer a unique opportunity for direct dialogue among world leaders and could potentially lead to significant diplomatic advancements. However, the deep geopolitical divisions currently in place, particularly regarding the conflict in Ukraine and tensions in the Middle East, present substantial challenges for any real progress. The joint initiative by Brazil and China to mediate global conflicts, with a focus on global South nations, represents a significant shift in the traditional approach to international diplomacy. This proposal reflects the growing desire of developing countries to have a stronger voice in global affairs and could potentially offer new perspectives for conflict resolution. However, the effectiveness of this initiative will depend on the ability to build consensus among nations with divergent interests and to overcome the deep existing geopolitical divides. The success or failure of this approach could have significant implications for the future of the world order and the role of emerging powers in the resolution of international conflicts. If you enjoyed this content and want to stay updated on the latest geopolitical analyses, don't forget to subscribe to the Current Affairs in Focus channel. Leave a like so this content can reach more people. Click the subscribe button now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. We're in this together.